Ray Dalio, a seasoned macro investor with over 50 years of experience, shares profound insights from his extensive journey. He emphasizes learning from history to decipher current complexities, highlighting the unprecedented levels of debt, internal conflicts, and international tensions that shape today's world.
What I learned in my life over 50 years of macro investing is that many things that surprised me because they didn't happen in my lifetime before, but they happened many times in history. Pandemic is a good example. But I didn't realize that if I looked back on history when these new developments occurred, that I could learn the lessons of the past. And so there were three things that drew my attention that led me to study the last 500 years of history, particularly to study the rise and declines of world reserve currencies and the empires that were behind them. And those three things were the very large amounts of debt and money creation, the creation of debt and the printing of money in the reserve currency to monetize that debt. That's one. Never happened in these magnitudes before, these levels of debt, this monetization. You have to go back to the 1930 to 45 period to see that, and it happened many times in history. The second is great internal conflict because of large wealth and values gaps, leading to very large political gaps of extremists of both sides, populists of the left and populists of the right, and that conflict. By all of those measures, wealth gaps, political gaps, and so on, in the United States, the gaps are the largest also since the 1930 to 45 period. Actually, they're larger than that. You have to go back to 1900 to find them so large. And they are shaping the political decisions, the economic decisions. You could see it, and not only in the United States, but in many countries.
Over 50 years of macro investing, Ray Dalio learned that historical lessons can guide understanding of surprises like pandemics. He highlights unprecedented debt and money creation, historical debt monetization, and significant internal conflicts due to wealth gaps. This led him to study 500 years of history on world reserve currencies and empires.
But particularly, most importantly, in the United States. And the third force is the international conflict, the great power rivalry that most importantly exists between the United States and China now, and also, of course, Russia, and those types of conflicts. By all measures, and in the book you see all of these are measured, and you see statistics that go back 500 years, and you could see that these are the largest. So I studied that, and then when I studied history, I also saw two other major forces, and in China, you know it. Those are acts of nature is the first, and that shows that droughts, floods, and pandemics have toppled more civilizations and killed more people than wars or depressions. They have a bigger impact, very important. And of course, they are factors today. And the fifth is human innovation and inventions. And this is a particularly big factor. So those five factors, the wealth and the printing of a lot of money, creating a lot of debt. The second is the internal conflicts. Third, the external conflict. Fourth, acts of nature. And fifth, the technology. And they operate in big cycles. You can see these cycles over and over again. In the book, you'll see the charts measuring all of these things, plus many others. And they form these big cycles. And so by knowing where we are in the cycle helps me today. Now, when we look at 500 years of history, we think, oh, why did we look at that? That's so big and irrelevant. But these issues right now affect us at the moment. The debt and money situation, the internal political situation, the external. We see it day by day, and they together are determining the environment we're in.
Ray Dalio underscores three pivotal forces: soaring debt and money creation, internal conflicts rooted in wealth gaps, and international rivalries, primarily between the US, China, and Russia. He acknowledges the potent impacts of natural disasters and innovation throughout history. By analyzing these factors across 500 years, Dalio reveals distinct cycles that influence the current landscape significantly. His insights illustrate how these historical dynamics directly shape the present global environment.
There are two cycles, two debt cycles. There's a short term that usually is what they call a business cycle. On average, it's averaged about 7 years. In other words, from recession to growth to bubble to recession, about on average 7 years, give or take about 3 years. And those have added up over a period of time to a long-term debt cycle because debt levels have risen relative to income levels. And the way it works mechanically is very cyclical because when you give credit, you give buying power. But credit comes with debt, and debt is the necessity to pay back. And therefore, when you pay back, that is not stimulative, that is depressing. And so it produces that cycle. And because central banks don't want the bad part of that, they stimulate more and more at those cycles. And so the debt levels and build up, and one man's debts are another man's assets. And so that balancing act continues, and that's the cycle. So in the world right now, mostly led by the United States, but other countries too, particularly Western countries, you're seeing the cycle, you're at the part of the cycle where there is the short-term cycle where there's a tightening of monetary policy. And that tightening of monetary policy to fight inflation, because the cycle works. You put a lot of credit and stimulate, and you create a lot of debt, and then it picks up the economy, and then with that it produces inflation. The amounts that were created are unprecedented except in the 1930 to 45 period, the amounts of debt. So they produced an inflation. It should be not surprising. You produce a lot of credit, a lot of buying, it produces a lot of inflation. And so now you're seeing that tightness of monetary policy, but still you're producing more debt than you are paying back. In other words, the spending is greater than the incomes of the United States and a number of countries. And so that builds up. So we're in the tightening part of the short-term debt cycle. We're also at a stage in the cycle where the long-term debt cycle is a problem because there's a lot of paying back. You cannot sustain spending more than you're earning because then that reduces the returns and so on. So we are in a situation where even the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency is coming more into question, partially because the United States is no longer the dominant trading power. So, for example, China counts for a higher percentage of world trade than the United States does. And up until recently, it did not denominate that trade in Chinese currency, in renminbi. But increasingly, there is a desire both on the parts of those who are transacting internationally and in China to increasingly diversify their reserves and their transactions. And so you're seeing that happen.
In his thorough analysis, Dalio identifies 5 major forces propelling historical cycles: debt dynamics, internal conflicts, external rivalries, natural disasters, and human innovation. By comprehending these cycles, we gain a clearer understanding of our present environment and the potential shifts that lie ahead, including the challenges facing world reserve currencies like the US dollar.